Hello and welcome to This Is. Today we got some gaming console myths, like, did the FBI make a mind-controlling arcade game?
Yes, they did, because we made our very first episode of This Is all about the myth of Polybius, which is actually a myth and not actually.
Yeah, this is totally an urban legend. So in 1981, supposedly the government placed some arcade cabinets in Portland, Oregon. The game was said to be so addictive that people would fight over who got to play next, and it was reportedly causing hallucinations, amnesia, insomnia, seizures, and night terrors.
There were lots of arcade cabinets that were put in test markets, and seeing things come and go, maybe not with final branding, it's not outside the realm of possibility that people got a little punchy on the real reason behind the mind-controlling arcade cabinet, especially when there were stories back in the 80s of kids, like, gaming for hours and hours and hours and actually having, like, seizures and stuff because they didn't eat or drink for 10 hours at a time or something.
This is my favorite part of the story. All they had was, like, orange soda and Coke for, like, 3 days straight, and they got so constipated that they had to go to the hospital.
Oh, okay.
So,
That's not
because they couldn't poop their pants, now there's a mind-controlling arcade cabinet. This one's debunked. Let's see what the next one is.
Do PlayStations have a kill switch? This is not a myth that I had heard before we started doing research for this video, but supposedly, especially in Japan, there was a lot of myths that Sony, and specifically for the PlayStation division, were putting in sort of planned obsolescence with their consoles.
So the reason this was connected to the PlayStation was because the batteries in the PS3 and PS4s, it was the CMOS battery, and those started to die, and when they were dead, they couldn't connect to the PlayStation network.
The idea was that if at some point in the future PSN no longer works and you didn't have that CMOS battery that was charged, your console wouldn't know the date, wouldn't be able to activate, wouldn't be able to really do much of anything. Again, like most myths, there were kernels of truth here in that if they didn't fix some of these things, PS3s and PS4s would die at some point. But even though I might not be the biggest fan of some of Sony's decisions when it comes to business, I don't think that they are as nefarious as this to put a hidden kill switch inside their consoles.
I mean, they're not Apple with their iPhones.
Okay, Matt, that's not a game console myth.
That's not a game console myth, but you know what is a game console myth? Did blowing into the NES or SNES cartridges fix them? No.
Absolutely.
But yes.
Of course it did.
So, did blowing into them help with them loading? It absolutely did, but it wasn't the actual blowing that made this work. So most people assume the trick worked because they were cleaning dust from the contacts.
Yeah.
But the NES had a weird connection method that required zero insertion force. It's kind of like,
as the kids say.
Yeah, they wanted it to feel springy, which was cool, especially on the SNES when you had that awesome push button spring. However, this caused the connections to kind of bend and wear out quickly. If you had just unplugged it, plugged it back in without blowing on it, probably would have fixed it regardless of blowing on it. Now, moisture from your breath could actually help with the connection.
And that's the crazy thing that I think actually makes this myth a little bit realistic, because, if your game's not working, you blow on it, you put it in, you're immediately going to think it works. But part of the reason for that was there's condensation in your breath. Having a little bit of extra moisture on the pens could help to bridge those electrical connections. It's also a little bit of a superstitious kind of thing, so people have just kind of continued to do it.
You know, it's not superstition, this next myth.
Can you fix the Xbox 360 Red Ring of Death with towels? I'm sad to say that I feel we actually have to explain what the Red Ring of Death is, because some people weren't alive when that happened. So the OG model of the Xbox 360 that launched in 2005 had what was known as the Red Ring of Death, which is essentially an issue of overheating due to a couple of technical problems when they actually were producing the consoles, which would basically mean that after a while, your console would lock up, you get the 3 little red rings, dunzo. It was over. That is not a myth. That was 100% a fact, and it was hugely costly to Microsoft. But what was how to fix it using the towel trick. As a naive, however old I was, teenager, traded in all of my PSP, most every video game I had to my local video game store in order to buy a used Xbox 360, and it get the Red Ring of Death about a month after I did that. I took it back to them and they fixed it by, I think, doing the towel trick.
Can you tell me what the towel trick was?
Yeah. Overheat the out of your Xbox.
So basically you wrapped it in a towel.
Let it get super hot. Let it reflow the solder. Let it warp things back into place. The thing was, this actually did kind of work, but it kind of worked in the way that you can slow your car down by running into a brick wall. The problem, though,
but it wasn't a fix.
It was not a fix. In fact, it was very likely to end up killing your Xbox entirely once you did this a few times.
So the myth that it was a fix is busted. Can you install Windows 10 on the Xbox One or Series X?
The thing is that while the Xbox One and the Series X are based on, it used to be like Windows, I think 8, now it's like Windows 10.
Yeah. The hardware is coded. It's the South Bridge, North Bridge, the proprietary designs. So they don't make drivers that work with Windows 10 for the Xbox.
It's based on that same kind of architecture. It is so heavily locked down that there's no way for us as mere mortals to do it. Now, if Microsoft wanted to, I feel very confident they could make this happen. But why would they? And why would they undercut PC sales with the Series X at $500 that racks everything at $1,500?
I will admit that I am the idiot who believed this one. Next slide, please. Are there Halo Easter eggs in all of the Xbox consoles? Can you tell me about this, Austin Evans?
Yes, I can, because I think I was one of the first people to find these. So it began in the Xbox One S. I believe it was on the fan shroud or the power supply or something, but there's a little Master Chief Easter egg there. I remember I was really excited because that was one of those first moments where we found something that was really exclusive and that no one had figured it out. And then it went viral with people just screenshotting my video and not
tagging you in it?
Yeah. But yeah, the Series S and the Series X, and I actually have multiple things. So they actually put a lot of Easter eggs inside these consoles. I know because I open a lot of Xboxes. But actually, this is not a myth. This is 100% confirmed. Microsoft are crafty little boogers. The next one is, does Nintendo create artificial scarcity for their consoles? Now, you might walk down the street and see your local Target out of Switch OLEDs, out of Switch lights, not selling the new 3DS XL. They should still make it. But the thing is, I don't believe that this myth is true. Now, it's a complicated thing. It's hard to say. Like, making and manufacturing consoles is difficult, and Nintendo, one of the very few companies who actually profit off of the sale of consoles, it is very difficult, especially with supply chains as they are now, to keep stuff like Switches in stock. Because, let's face it, people are absolutely still crazy about the Switch, even though it has been out for 5 years now.
Yeah, that's absurd to me. People just really like the Switch, and they're buying them up left and right. It's the #1 selling console in the world.
And you have to kind of keep into context, right? The Switch came after the Wii U, which was a historically horrible flop that Nintendo really wishes that you would completely forget about. So it's understandable that they were a little bit sort of slow on the Wii. And to be fair, I don't know why Nintendo gets singled out. Sony's no better. Microsoft's only slightly better. I mean, it's a hard business to decide. Are you going to make, you know, $100 million worth of PS5s or $100 billion?
Yeah, especially when we're in a chip shortage. If they were artificially doing this, they would jack up the prices. To be fair, I think the Switch should be about $50 less across the board, but that's just my opinion.
I mean, 100 million people disagree with you.
I agree that they disagree. But you know what we don't disagree with? We can all agree on our next myth.
Does Pikachu hate Sony?
I was gonna do that one, but no.
That's fine. Hey You Pikachu was a game for the N64 where it had the microphone and you could talk to Pikachu. It was incredibly rudimentary, right? Even for its time, it was very limited. And the rumor was that if you said Sony or PlayStation, Pikachu would get mad. And to be fair, that did kind of happen sometimes. We also could say like the word like bread and Pikachu might get mad. Like it was just so rudimentary.
What it probably was frustration from Pikachu not understanding what you're actually trying to say.
Yeah, and in fact, later on, when the game was actually decompiled, it was found that there were no Sony or PlayStation. This just was not a real thing.
They weren't even in his list of vocabulary.
But you know what?
Which probably just frustrated this tiny little AI brain.
You know what it was in his vocabulary?
What?
Our next myth. How Sega has killed its console business with the most expensive game of all time.
Many people blame that Shenmue was the reason that Dreamcast failed because it was so expensive and failed to break even. You know what really killed the Dreamcast? There's no type of like copy protection on any of the discs.
Because they were like 1 gig CDs or something.
It was just it was just a base CD. Everyone I knew who had a Dreamcast had a massive collection. They never bought games for it.
Yeah. Other thing was specifically when it was related to Shenmue. So this was an expensive game for the time, right? And it was a very unique looking title. But the thing is, while it was expensive, the estimates kind of put it maybe between like $45 to $70 million. Shenmue was expensive, but the Dreamcast was doomed to failure far before this actually came out. The other thing was, there were other issues that sort of kept the Dreamcast from reaching its full potential because Nintendo and Sony were really starting to dominate the space. Sega had kind of been a little bit on the back foot really since the Saturn had failed to kind of take off. The Dreamcast had everything going against it, and it inevitably crashed and burned, and we got the Xbox.
Did Atari make an ET game so bad that they buried millions of cartridges in the desert?
When I hear the word gaming myths, this is, and I think will always be, #1 because this was an absolutely massive urban legend. So to set the stage, back in the early 80s, this was really the peak of home console gaming, right? So the Atari 2600 was huge and there were big dollars flowing around, but there was trouble looming because one of the issues with the Atari games was that they were turning quickly into shovelware. They were just literally shovelware.
Anyone could develop anything for any system. There was no quality control. Anyone could make whatever the hell they wanted for these devices.
So with shovelware on the rise and Atari getting incredibly punchy by doing things like creating 12 million copies of the Pac-Man game when they had only sold 10 million consoles, and then there was stuff like E.T., which was a huge movie tie-in, Atari was convinced that they were going to just make an absolute pile of money on it, and because of that, they forced a single guy to make the whole game in like 5 weeks, and it was terrible, widely regarded as one of the worst games of all time. So you've got the stage where Atari are making horrible financial decisions, printing more games than they have made consoles to play said games. So Atari, in the dead of night, took millions of games, or at least hundreds of thousands of these unsold cartridges, dumped them in a landfill, never to be seen again. Now, this seemed so outrageous and ridiculous that it was not believed until 2014, in which, for a documentary, they excavated at the site that it supposedly happened, and they found the games. And in fact, I think actually a lot of them got like sort of authenticated and sold. I'd love to have one of these games because that'd be awesome to have in a collection. It's a wild story.
For the longest time, this was along the lines of, you know, oh, my uncle at Nintendo told me X, whatever. So, like, I mean, the myth that they buried millions is probably debunked. This is crazy to find out something such a big urban legend.
Over 20 years later.
This would be along the same lines of, imagine if Plebius turned out to be real that we found out, like, recently.
Imagine.
That'd be crazy.
Imagine if the millions of people who are watching this video right now forgot to hit the subscribe button to ring-a-ling the notification bell to always be updated the next time that your buddies Austin and Matt hit you with some spicy gaming myths. And until next time, stay out of the landfills, friends, because it's mostly garbage there. You're not going to find any more Atari games.